Morning and welcome to Funding and Scaling. This is our quarterly event. We're coming to you live from our office down at Space, down on Bride Street, and we're socially distanced, and we're looking forward to a wonderful event here with you this morning. This is an interactive event. We have lots of time for questions, both during the event and at the end, where we have an interactive session with some of our consultants, and you're more than welcome to pose questions during the event or when we get to the end, and we will find time for them. For those of you who don't know us, let me just tell you a little bit about Dublin BIC. Our mission in life is to help entrepreneurs start and scale. Quite simple. And we do that through two main ways. Firstly, we work on investor preparation. We get you ready to go talk to investors, and that might be helping you with a business plan, with a financial model, with an investment strategy to get you ready. And the second thing we do is we then bring you to funders. We have a very close relationship with Enterprise Ireland. We have our own seed fund. You'll hear from Richard, who runs that fund later on today. We run an angel network, and you'll hear a little bit about that during the course of the event. And we have links across the wider ecosystem of funders. So at Dublin BIC, we're here to help you. Make sure you talk to us. Come to us at startup@dublinbic.ie. We'd love to hear from you. So what are we doing here this morning? The purpose of this event is to bring funders, founders, investors, and the stakeholders together to kind of understand what does it take to start and scale a company. And that's what we're going to explore over the next 90 minutes. It's your chance to understand, I suppose, the mechanics of funding and scaling. And we will go into detail. You'll hear from some great speakers, and they'll tell you about some of their steps on the journey. So the purpose of the event is to bring you together, to let you network and to let you ask questions of people who are maybe slightly ahead in the journey than you, and gives you the opportunity to learn from that. Our agenda, firstly, we'll hear from Michael Colligan. He's the CEO of Dublin BIC. I'll introduce him in a moment. And Michael will talk in some detail about the funding landscape. Where are the funds? How do you get them? And where do you find them? We'll hear then three different stories from three different founders. Firstly, we'll hear from Dr. Kellie Adamson of SepTec. And Kellie will talk a little bit about maybe accessing European funding, which is a really nice angle to hear from. And she'll be in conversation with our own Heidi Core. We'll hear from Marco at Evercam in conversation with Richard Watson of the Dublin DBIC Ventures fund. And they'll talk about the mechanics of raising a seed round. You know, what does it take to raise a round? And Marco was successfully raised with Richard before Christmas. What does it take to raise that round, and what do you have to do to bring it together? And then finally, we'll hear from Will Parker of Safefood 360 in conversation with Martin Murray, one of our own colleagues. And they'll talk about building scale to exit. And we've worked, in collaboration with these companies and lots of other companies on that journey from the very early stage to the exit stage. And we'd love to share that with you. And that's what we're trying to do here this morning. As I said, lots of room for questions, lots of time for questions. Keep them coming in. If I don't get to them all during the event, we have time at the end where our consultants are available. We'll take your questions and we'll engage in a good conversation. So have a great event. We're really excited that you're here with us this morning. And without any further ado, I'll ask Michael Colligan, the CEO of Dublin BIC, to come on and talk to us about funding and the mechanics of funding. Michael.
Thank you, Conor. And I'm absolutely delighted to join you this morning, folks. It's really fantastic to see close on 600 people register for the event. I think it's reflective of the entrepreneurial appetite that's in place, notwithstanding the current macro environment. As Conor said in his opening remarks, we're here to help you to start and scale your business. As an organisation, we've been doing that for 33 years. And where we've got to today is we're number one for private funding on an annual basis with near 20 million between angel and venture funding. In engaging with people like you who are thinking of starting a business or early in that journey, the number one question we get asked all the time is, where can I get funding? So the purpose of my piece this morning, I think, is to try and give you an overview of that funding landscape and to hopefully shed some light and make that a little bit easier for you. I'm going to start briefly by, remarking that it's my view that there are more scale-up companies in Ireland now than ever before, more serial entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of positivity about the startup landscape, more to go, of course. And in that regard, if I even reflect back briefly over the past 12 months, even during the pandemic, of companies that we've worked with over the last decade, companies like Engage EHS, Avril Copeland at Inner Strength, companies like Iconic Translations, even Learn Upon with Brendan Nowd, Decawave, Race Caller. All these companies have exited or taken serious PE money on board over the last year at valuations anywhere from 10, 15, 40 million, over 100 and even over 400. So we are definitely making significant progress. I guess the sort of lens I want to shine on that is if I look back at those companies, I ask myself the question as to how did they get funded? You'll find the majority of them were actually funded through their own money, private angel money and Enterprise Ireland. And that's the primary combination of funding that people use. A subset of companies then will use venture funding, and we will touch on that a little bit later. What I'm going to do now for the next little while is talk about the sources of funding. And there's a little bit of data here, so do bear with me. But I think you'll find that there are a lot of different sources. And we did some research in Q4 last year. And the feedback that came back very strongly from you guys in the marketplace is there's a lot of confusion about the help that's out there. Now, we have a view across the whole piece, and I hope that will come across in my remarks over the next little while. I'm going to start to talk about public funding. There are a range of public funding sources available, starting quickly with micro enterprises, and these are looked after primarily by the local enterprise offices, where you can get anything from a feasibility grant for 15k through to a priming grant, through to a business expansion grant up to 80k. Moving on from the micro enterprises in Leo, next up would be Enterprise Ireland itself, and you would start there with what we would call the New Frontiers programs. They're run in partnership with the Institutes of Technology throughout the country. There are 16 of those, and I understand that they're planning about 22, what they call Phase 1 New Frontier programs this year, and an additional maybe 12 Phase 2 programs. And that would support of the order of 500 entrepreneurs. And details of those are to be updated over the next week on the New Frontiers website, I'm informed. Moving on from New Frontiers, the next step up then for companies just that little bit further on, companies maybe with a minimum viable product, is the Enterprise Ireland Competitive Start Fund. One of those has just closed in the last few days. We will run annually the female one, a female enterprise one called Innovator. So throughout 2021, there'll be at least another 2 calls. Each of those supports about 20 companies. So in total, you're talking about 60 companies getting up to 50,000 for 10% equity in their company. Of course, the main source of public funding in Ireland is through the very excellent Enterprise Ireland HPSU scheme. On an annual basis, that typically supports 80 or 90 companies, and normally of the order of a total of 25 million, maybe about 250,000 into each company. In the last year, that number was much higher, maybe 40 plus million, with some money going back into existing HPSUs to counteract the effects of the pandemic. There's also money available through things like innovation vouchers through the colleges, and if you're doing entrepreneurship from within a college, there's various sources of funds. The final one I want to call out in a public funding perspective is European money. Some of you will be familiar. The previous system was Horizon 2020. There's a new system in place now, Horizon Europe it's called. It has been piloted over the last couple of years, and one of the companies, SepTec, later has availed of it under what's known as EIC Accelerator, or European Innovation Council Accelerator. And it's really interesting because Europe is now seeking to put money directly into companies, and up to 2.5 million of grant money. And even then in a blended finance format over a number of years, the possibility of up to 15 million in equity money. It has been run as a pilot. It'll be mainstreamed later in the year, and watch this space. We're waiting on more information therein. I'm going to wrap now on that public funding piece, and maybe simply to say the commentary is, compared to other countries in Europe, actually we're in a very good position with regard to availability of public funding, but it's certainly the case that it can be a little bit confusing. So pick up the phone, contact us. We have a view across the whole piece. We will guide you as to where the correct source or sources of funding are. I'm going to move now from the public and move to the private funding. Some of the public funding needs private funding to match it. The number one source of private funding is and always has been business angel funding. Today in Ireland, that breaks into 2 categories. There is formal business angel funding through the HBAN Business Angel Network. We ourselves at Dublin BIC, in partnership with the Irish BICs, run that. And I'm really proud and pleased to say it has grown dramatically over the last number of years, and is now on an annual basis enabling about 16 million of pure private angel money into about 60 companies on the island. Apart from that, then you have what we call the ad hoc business angel investing through people, through friends, through accountants, contacts, through family offices, etc. And that in most countries, including Ireland, is usually about 6 or 7 times the size of the formal angel market. So there could be anything like 70 or 80 million more going in through that. Other sources of funding in Ireland in the early stage include the likes of Elkstone and SOS Ventures, who will invest a couple of $100K and have the ability to follow on after. SOS is involved obviously internationally, but is active in Ireland in the early stage. That will take us on then beyond that to venture. The commentary with regard to venture capital in Ireland is a couple of fold. It has moved on dramatically. There's close on $1 billion under management overall. But we're interested here, and you guys are interested in start and scale in that early stage. And in that regard, the following are the companies that are active today. We ourselves, after a major effort, are in the market with, I suppose, the largest dedicated seed and early stage fund, the Ireland Smart Tech Fund, the 30 million technology fund. Eic Venture, who have a 90 million main fund, have a sidecar 30 million early stage fund. And BVP Ventures have an EIS fund, which does a small number of investments each year. The University Fund invests in companies directly out of the universities. In more recent times, we have Sure Venture, who are investing in IoT and software companies early stage also. Then you have the Western Development Commission with an evergreen fund, which is very active in medical device, but not just in the early space. Obviously, it's geographically constrained to Western counties. And then you have the likes of the Yields Lab, which is a new vertical in AgTech, in the AgTech space. You have a number of other funds then, which are more established funds like Frontline, Delta, Finch, and Finisterre, who will do some seed, but obviously it's not their main area of focus, and some of those have an international focus as well as domestic. My commentary now on the private funding overall then is, where are we at? We're pretty good with early stage private funding. We have loads of venture out here. That place in the middle is a little bit squeezed, and it's my personal view that more needs to be done there. We ourselves made an enormous effort to bring a fund to the market because it was needed, but I believe more is needed in that middle place. I'm going to wrap now pretty shortly, but what I'd like to do before wrapping, I suppose, is just give a little maybe perspective or commentary. Where are we at in Ireland with regard to entrepreneurship and funding? We've come a long way, and that's great and to be celebrated, but the bar is getting raised higher and higher internationally all the time. So there's more for us to do. I acknowledge that the marketplace is confusing out there. So we say to you, come to us at Dublin BIC. We're here to help you. We work in close partnership with the private sector and Enterprise Ireland. And we're a public-private entity, so we're here to help you in that regard. The next point, just to finish off, would be that you have to respect the money of the people you're fundraising. So if you're fundraising, you've got to hustle, you've got to respect that money, and show that by how you prepare and show it by how you spend the money afterwards. My final thing is you should spend most of your time in value creation. If you create serious value and have something that's really properly differentiated in the market and you prepare properly, then you will succeed. What we would say to you at Dublin BIC is, we don't guarantee you funding, but we do say to you, if you come to us and join our Investor Ready programs, you will have the best chance of sourcing funding, be that from ourselves or other sources in the marketplace. So I think without further ado, I'll maybe leave it at that and ask Conor to come back in and join us. And I hope that's been helpful to you. Thank you, folks.
Michael, thanks so much. A tremendous overview of what's going on in the market. We've got some questions coming in, so if you're okay, I might keep you for a minute or two and jump to that. So the first question I think that comes up is there enough seed funding to meet the demand in the market? And it probably goes to that piece you're talking about in the middle there. So maybe you might just talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Conor. Yes, and I'm conscious, obviously, there's a lot of information to get through. So as I say, please, for people out there, do reach back out to our team and we can have more time to go through this. Look, that's a great question. And I think the short answer is no, there isn't enough in that middle area. And we know this, directly. We have really, I suppose, made an enormous effort to bring a new seed fund to the market. And the reason we did that is, when we looked out there just wasn't enough funding dedicated to companies seeking to, in that middle space. There is enough in the early stage when you're getting started, be public or a little bit of private. But that middle space where you need money to really ramp it up and accelerate, you maybe have proved that you have something that's in demand, but you need money to scale it. Now, I think that's recognised here at a policy level, and there are plans afoot to try and bring more money into the market. But I would say the short answer is we need, as a nation, to remember that if we don't have enough money in that middle part, there won't be those scale-up companies to fund later. So we're doing okay, but more needs to be done in terms of early stage venture funding.
More needs to be done to build the pipeline, to build the scale-up ones. Yeah. Thanks, Michael. If I could ask you, the common perception, I suppose, is that a lot of the investment goes into the tech space and into, we hear about these tech giants and whatnot. What's happening in manufacturing sector? Are you seeing much there in terms of investment and support in specifically for manufacturing?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. And if you'd asked me that maybe a couple of years back, it would very much have been not much. An awful lot of that world moved to China, etc. But the economics of all that have changed somewhat in more recent times, and we are now starting to see products and offerings which might be industrial based or hardware based and manufacturing coming back a little bit. They still can pose some challenges, and so far I suppose is what's happened from an investor perspective is that the cost of setting up a software-based business is a lot less than it was, so investors therefore are naturally a little bit more attracted to that. So it's important not to roll over. We have to acknowledge that if you're making hardware or doing something of that nature on a manufacturing base, it brings other challenges. But the answer is it's starting to come back a little bit, and even in the industrial area we're seeing the likes of ag tech and areas like that which might blend software and hardware together, and there's some funding available for those now that perhaps wasn't there before. So it's getting there early. Getting there.
I'll ask one more question and then we'll move to the next segment, but I'm going to ask you to stay with us, Michael, maybe just for a bit. I have a question around what makes the difference. You touched on it briefly at the end of your piece, but what makes the difference? You've been doing this for a good number of years. What's the difference between success and failure in your view?
Time flies, Conor. Yes. Indeed. Look, I spent a good bit of time traveling around the world selling embedded software and things, but then came across this early stage world and I'm hooked by it. If I had a single word with regard to why people succeed versus those that don't, it probably is resilience of the entrepreneur. The entrepreneurial journey is a tough one. It's incredibly exciting. It's incredibly a lot of ups and downs. Don't get over carried away with the ups, with the ups, and likewise with the downs. But you are going to need serious resilience. People are there to help as well. Don't be afraid to ask. People do like to help, but obviously be well prepared for it, etc. I think it's obviously the team that goes without saying, but it's the resilience of the entrepreneur, the vision they have from the outset, staying true to that and listening to the feedback, but being your own. Resilience, I think. Take those opinions on board, shape them, and then do what you need to do in that tenacity piece. And I love the piece you mentioned there, but there is a lot of support available in the ecosystem. You've just got to go out, you've got to reach. And events like this, what we're trying to do is connect people so that you do go looking for those supports. Absolutely. And obviously, look, we're in the pandemic at the moment. We're closed down. We're here in our location in Space at Dublin BIC in Bride Street. People will know, of course, that we also manage the Guinness Enterprise Centre, which is located up in Dublin 8, and we've had a major project going on over the last couple of years to double the size of that, to be a phenomenal global entrepreneurial super hub. So I really look forward to holding an event in person up there with people who were talking to in their home offices this morning. And I think it's that sort of inability to network, connect, and have startup and scale up and maybe even larger corporates all together. That's the kind of networking that can help move things along. Fantastic, Michael. Great insights. So thank you for coming in today there. And I might come back to you in a while. So moving on then to the first of our entrepreneurial discussions. And we said at the outset that we'd look at some early stage, mid stage, and then the later stage. And starting at the beginning, I'm delighted that we're joined this morning by Dr. Kellie Adamson of SepTec. Changing the rules of sepsis diagnosis, which I think is a fantastic line and will set it up nicely. And Kellie has a particular angle that I think Heidi's going to explore with her, which is around this European funding and accessing European funding as part of a consortium that Kellie has taken part in. So in conversation with our own Heidi Core of Dublin BIC, I'll ask you to introduce or say a big hello to Kellie Adamson, Dr. Kellie Adamson of SepTec.
Hi, Hi, good morning.
Hi,
Thank
Heidi.
you, Connor and Michael, for that great introduction. Thank you. I'm Heidi Core, investment consultant with Dublin BIC, and I'm absolutely very privileged to be in conversation with Dr. Kellie Adamson, CSO, co-founder with Dr. Elaine Spain of SepTec. As Connor mentioned there, SepTec's core technology detects sepsis in minutes, not hours. Sepsis is a life-threatening illness with annually 49 million people diagnosed and 11 million of those dying. Up to 80% of those could be avoided with early diagnosis. Kellie, that is some weight on your shoulders to have with your technology. Can you please take us back to the beginning of your journey, which led ultimately to the amazing 2.4 million award by the EIC and the European Innovation Council funding that Michael mentioned earlier? Over to you.
Yeah, so this actually started way back with myself and Elaine's PhDs. So Elaine was in Dublin City University and I was through the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, but I was based mostly in DCU. It was a collaborative PhD. And a lot of my background was through biomaterial science, and Elaine was ultrasensitive electrochemical detection. And basically by the end of kind of both of our PhDs and Elaine's postdoc, we realized that we combined both of our technologies together, we could basically really enhance the capture of low numbers of cells in a very, very quick time frame. So this was basically where we decided to go to the next step, and we applied for an Enterprise Ireland feasibility fund to see where the market need was for this technology. So we knew we could do early stage detection, low numbers of cells within a very quick time frame. And what actually came back then was sepsis. And at that time, that was 2013, there wasn't a lot of sepsis awareness at that time. So we were like, that's brilliant. So that's when we started, and we applied for the Enterprise Ireland Commercialisation Fund, which we were successful in. That was in 2014. We spent 2 years developing the cartridge test. And by that point, we had just got it to work, and the commercialisation fund was actually running out. So we applied for a second commercialisation fund, which we were successful in, which started in 2016. And then over those 2 years, we actually realized that, now we have the cartridge test, but how are we going to get it outside of the lab? And that's where it came in, where we actually developed an analyzer instrument to go with that cartridge test. So over those 2 years, then we'd come to the point where we had a function prototype and a functioning prototype analyzer. Following on from that, then we applied for the SFI Future Innovator Prize. So this was a really interesting new prize. It was the first time it had been run. And this was all based around how can you quantify your solution, and is your solution what your end users really need? So we were successful in reaching the second phase of that, which was €200,000. And that whole 9 months was basically getting out there, talking to clinicians, nurses, doing focus groups, interviewing over 80 clinicians across the world to figure out, is what we're doing what they need? And thankfully, the answer is yes, they really need it, they really want it, and they want it at the bedside. So then it was coming to the end of the SFI Future Innovator Prize, and we actually applied for a third Enterprise Ireland Commercialisation Fund. Enterprise Ireland have been absolutely amazing in terms of the support they've given us. They see the future in SepTec, and they've put a lot of money into backing the development of the project. And we were successful then with the third fund, and that's actually just finished this month. So we really leveraged public funding as much as we can. And the next stage was to spin out of Dublin City University, raise the investment to really drive it forward in terms of the commercial developments that we need to do. But as Michael said, we're in an awkward position because we are high risk. So we require a lot of manufacturing. We're capital intensive. And because we are a Class C device, if we give the wrong result, that's detrimental to the patient. Regulatory requirements are really stringent. So it is a long enough development pathway to get it onto the market. So that's where kind of the EIC fund came in. So we decided, it was basically January of last year that we tried to get into the first application for the EIC fund. And we're so used to writing grants, we usually do 3-4 weeks and it's pumped out. The EIC is a whole other ballgame. It's a new world. 3 weeks is not enough for the EIC, so that would be my first tip. So we just missed the deadline for that. And then we got in contact with Lyra Consulting. So we actually we consulted with Lyra for the first application that we actually made for, and we were just under the threshold for being moving forward with the interview. So that's when we decided to then really put the efforts in to get to the second application, which was October of this year. And
Kellie,
we were absolutely delighted.
Can I just come in with a question there? Because I know when we were chatting earlier, you were mentioning there was obviously a lot to learn, not only from the 3 different commercialisation funds that you went for, but also when you first went in March 2020 for the EIC funding, there was a 1% success rate. And obviously on that occasion, you didn't sort of make that particular call. But what were the key learnings that you got, and what was the feedback that you got?
So the feedback is actually not very detailed when you do get the results from the EIC fund. So it is very hard to gauge you basically get it's a scoring system. So you kind of know the certain sections that you've kind of scored lower on. But there are no actually detailed feedback. So you kind of just work off going, right, it's these sections where they're not really happy. So you need to try gauge, right, what are we missing? But that's where Lyra Consulting kind of came in. They've been through this process so many times that they kind of become part of your team and they help guide the process. So even with the lack of feedback that we got, they kind of knew where to go from that in that sense. Whereas if you were doing it on your own, it will be very hard to try to figure out what they're actually looking for.
The work that you did with the Science Foundation when you had the 200k grant and when you just missed out on the million funding, the work that you actually carried out with that funding held you in super position in preparation for the EIC funding. Can you just expand on that? Because it links very much to one of the categories of why then you were awarded the EIC funding.
Yeah, so one of the things with the SFI Future Innovator Prize is how are you impactful? It's all about impact, it's specifically, especially from a societal point of view, and how do you quantify that impact? Whereas to that point, we hadn't really delved a lot into that. It was all about the development of the actual product itself. So over those 9 months, we actually carried out focus groups with hospitals. We carried out questionnaires. We interviewed over 80 clinicians across 50 countries. And we carried out a health economics study with a health economist to basically see if SepTec was implemented in the clinical workflow, what impact did that have? And that really gave us a good justification for how SepTec could really change clinical practice and what impact it could have on both the hospital and the patients. So without that work, it was really, we were purely relying on the technology and the validation in that sense. So combining both that and the societal impact and how realistically the effects that we could have on the healthcare system if we were implemented really gave us a shining light in terms of what the future of SepTec would be. And I really feel like that if anyone is in that same situation, same sector as us, it's really important to get out there and do those interviews with key opinion leaders, try get a few focus groups. And if you do have the budget to do a health economic study, definitely.
Okay, so because you mentioned the commercialisation funding ran out there, so if I can just take you back to where the business was, because you obviously started the business in 2014. So Michael mentioned earlier resilience. This in December 2020 is now a 6-year resilience journey. Where were you guys at? Where were you, Elaine? How were you feeling at that time?
Yeah, so as Michael said, there's a lot of highs and lows, and it really is those few highs. There is a lot more lows than the highs, but when you get those highs, it really pushes you forward. So, and as well, myself and Elaine, having that other person there really does help push you forward. When one is starting to give up, the other one is like, no, and drags you along. So we've always kind of jumped in. We also pull each other up as we go along, but the way our product is, it is a long road. So we did know from the get-go that this could be a 10-year timeline for us before we get this onto the market. We're now 6 years in, so we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it is the wins. So the fact it took 2 years to get the cartridge to work in the first place, once we got that working, that was, oh my God, absolutely brilliant. Now we got to the analyzer. It's in 2 year increments. It is a long process, but it's the fact that we're working on something that could just have such a huge impact, not just in Ireland, but across the globe. And to know that we could make that change, that is really something that just drives us forward. As a scientist, being able to do science that actually makes a difference to the world is just, it's a driver alone in itself.
And how did you both feel then come January when you, out of 4,000 applications, you were the only Irish company that were awarded the 2.4 million? What were your thoughts? How did you feel?
It was literally like winning the lotto, if that's how I can actually say it. Because as you said, you need resilience. Like, we were coming to, it was our last month's wage. This was a make or break for us. We'd gotten to a point where if this actually didn't come in, we were probably gone. So the fact that we got that email to say that we had gotten it, the fact that we got to the interview process, that alone for us was an absolute win. We never really thought that we would have the chance with such a low success rate. 1% is a needle in a haystack. So when we did get it, we I don't think it's sunk in yet, to be honest. Yeah.
So it's a little bit like anyone that's had a baby, and I know, congratulations, both you and Elaine actually had a little boy and a little girl, so congratulations on that. I always compare it to, it's like everything leads up to this big event. So you got awarded the 2.4 million. Suddenly that's here. Where do you go from there? What's the plan?
Yeah, so we are looking to raise investment. It is capital intensive. So this has given us a really great runway to give us the time to be able to secure that round. So we had investors and soft commitments, but obviously now the Eic Fund really validates the technology and validates where we are, and it de-risks it for these investors. So the whole plan now is to really just hit the ground running, to get those developments done, get the investment in, and basically bring the product to a point where it's ready for clinical trials by 2023. So the next 2 years are going to be extremely busy in terms of getting the system to a point where we're ready to do those clinical trials. But now it's really given us a good backing to be able to raise the investment that we need to really bring it to that point. So yeah, it's going to be a busy 2 years.
Okay. And just one final question. What is the end goal?
The end goal is to be able to see this through and see this on every shelf across every hospital across the globe. It is a very busy space. There are a lot of large players in this space. So the way to do this realistically is either going to be a partnership or acquisition at a certain time point. So we will be gauging our developments to really increase the value, to get it to a point where it's ready to be partnered up with the multinational companies.
So hopefully we'll be looking for an acquisition of about 150 to 400 million, Kellie.
Here's hoping, yep.
Wishing you the very best on that. If anyone can, Elaine can. Thank you so much for sharing that journey with us. Thank you. Resilience, I think, is going to be the key word for the day. Thank you.
Definitely, yeah.
And thank you so much, Kellie. I love that story, and I love the notion of the email landing. Like Willy Wonka's ticket had finally come through. Well done to you. Brilliant, brilliant story, and thanks for sharing. Before I let you go, can I ask you one question that came in? And it was around how difficult was that application process as you went through? And maybe just describe that for me, if you would.
Yeah, it's a totally different ball game to any other grant application. One of the things that we found was you really need to put the time in. It's not a month's job. It's not a 2 month job. It's minimum 3 months. For us, it was realistically 6 months. And I think that's what really allowed us to have that winning application. There's a lot of detail required. You can't just say you're going to get out onto the market and you're going to get distributions involved. It needs to be country specific. You need to have names of distributors. You have to have letters of potential engagement if you can. It's really trying to justify and have that in-depth plan for when you get on the market, what happens next. It's not even just getting onto the market. So it's a really long process. So I would really need to take the time to be able to dig deep into those details. And one of the biggest things as well is letters of support. So everything you can do, back it up with a letter of support. So trying to get those again takes time. So it's a good 6-month process.
Superb. Kellie, thank you so much for sharing your story with us this morning. I really appreciate it, and continued success. And Heidi, thanks so much for sharing that particular discussion and some great insights that you took out. So thank you very much. And Michael, if I could just come back to you on just one question there, and it's around kind of accessing support and finance in a more general context. So Kellie was talking to us there about it, so European funding, but our audience would love to know about what do I do? How do I access funding in general, private funding particularly? And maybe you could just give me your piece on that before I let you go.
Absolutely. Respect to Kellie and Elaine on that enormous resilience. Serious respect. We touched on it very briefly a little bit earlier. My main thing is like fundraising is like anything else. It's like business development. You need to put the work into it. And you can't, in general, just rock up, pitch to somebody and expect to get funding. So you need to build a relationship with the people if you're looking to raise funding. So engage early with them. Tell them what you're going to do. Don't overpromise, underpromise, overdeliver. Make the connection. Maybe I'm not looking for funding now, but I will be looking for funding. Here's what we're doing, etc. I'll be back to you a little bit later. People like to hear, build that relationship, and that goes for VCs. In certain verticals, if you have something that's very, very strong, for example, there are specialist international VCs in the early stage area, and that might be, you could reach out to these guys, get involved, build a relationship. And with private people here, the same thing. Build the relationship with them from early. People are interested, respect their time, be well prepared, and you'll find that people will engage.
And it's almost like a sales pipeline that you're building. You're kind of working it, you're keeping in contact, and people will take that call, they'll take the virtual coffee, they will engage at the early stage.
People are, people are curious.
Yes.
And they are interested, a subset of them, in this risky area, and they know it's risky, so they will. Another quick little comment, maybe it's just slightly off, but just before we finish, is in terms of the areas of focus nowadays. I guess the next 7-year European Green Deal cuts across from climate and digitization, and that spills down then into national governments and the policy, etc. So those are the areas, but do bear in mind they're pretty broad churches. So, but those are probably the areas of focus for the coming period as well.
Thanks so much. Michael, thanks for sharing your insights with us this morning.
Thanks, Conor.
And you'll stay around. We might have some more later on. We'll see. We talked at the outset that we would have an early stage, a mid stage and a late stage. And I'm delighted that for our mid stage, we're going to be in discussion with Marco Herbst of Evercam and our own Richard Watson of DBIC Ventures. And they have just been through the process. Marco has been fundraising, and Richard has been making his first deals and getting himself ready, I suppose, to enter the market. And I think Evercam was the first deal that he's done. What I'm going to do with Marco and Richard, I'm going to moderate a conversation which is around the mechanics of the deal, because I know to our audience that what we're interested in hearing about is how does one put together a seed round? What do you have to do? So look at it from Marco's perspective, how does he approach the investor? And then from Richard's perspective, how does he quantify that deal and how does he do his due diligence? So for about the next 20 minutes, I'm going to get into the mechanics of the seed round, and hopefully with the two guys, they'll share that with us. So Richard, good morning, and thank you for joining us. And we should have Marco with us as well. Is Marco here with us today? Yes. Hey Marco, good morning. And thank you so much for joining us. And as I said, we're going to get into the anatomy of the deal and the mechanics of the deal in as much detail as you guys would like to share or you feel comfortable with sharing. But it's a kind of an education process for the audience of putting that together. And maybe what I might just start, Marco, is you're building a fantastic business. I was looking at your website last night, 10 countries, 50 plus employees, 9 languages. You've just closed the seed round. Tell us about Evercam. What is it that you do and how did you come up with it? And tell us where you're at the moment.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Conor. Nice to be here. Hi, Richard. Our business is cameras on construction sites. Our idea is relatively simple. If you can see what's going on the construction site and you've got better tools for communication, you're going to get better outcomes. And specifically what I mean by better outcomes is, as we all know, construction is complex. When things go wrong, it gets expensive. This means delays, disputes, waste. And that's what we're trying to tackle. So better construction outcomes using a camera, essentially to be able to see, in very simple practical terms, what's going on. And in recent years, with the development of AI, we're now also able to take a lot of structured data off the camera feed. So things like what equipment is on site, what people are on site, and create meaningful reports to the people all across the chain in construction. So right from investors, developers, the main contractor, subcontractor, architect, design team, and so on.
And it's got multiple uses. When I was looking at I saw you can do your time lapse, you can do your health and safety, you can do access egress, whatever. It has a multiple applications, I suppose, for on that one site.
There is a lot of people working on a construction site. It's an orchestra, and the camera is of use to everybody. On average, we'd have about 40 people accessing the camera. And if you think about what a normal CCTV system is, it's the inverse of that. You might have one person looking at 40 cameras. And in our world, there's one camera with 40 people who are all getting something useful from that on a daily or weekly basis.
Fantastic. Richard, the last time we spoke at this event, I think was probably about 18 months ago. You were just getting ready to launch. You were finalising the long and painful process of fundraising. Where are you now? Bring us up to date on the fund.
We're in the market, thankfully. Michael referred to it earlier on. So yeah, it was a kind of a long process fundraising. We launched just before the pandemic with the very critical backing of Enterprise Ireland and 15 private investors. It's a seed to Series A fund. We've met with lots of companies over the last year. The sort of stage that we go in at along that continuum, anywhere from seed to Series A. In the case of Evercam, we'd call it sort of pre-Series A stage. But the fund is targeted at business-to-business software companies primarily across lots of different vertical markets. And also we'll do some medtech deals as well. So we're looking at doing 6 or 7 deals a year. I suppose a key part of the fund is we have the ability to follow on in companies that are performing well. We know from experience, of course, not every company that we back in the first round is going to make the journey. But we hold back. I mean, our typical check size in a first round is around 300, 350K. We have the ability to go up to 650,000 for companies that are a bit further on towards the Series A stage, and then follow on. And it's an all-Ireland fund. So we previously co-managed a fund, and our focus then was Dublin, but this is an all-Ireland fund. So quite broad sectorally. Michael touched on some other funds. There are some sectoral specific funds out there. We're broad. Probably not as much hardware as we would have done in the past, the exception being medical devices. But if we look at our deal flow, 75% of the deal flow we see is B2B software companies.
Very good. So you're open for business?
We're open for business. We're really hungry to do deals. Evercam was our first deal just before Christmas. We did a second deal in December. We're very, very active, got 3 term sheets out now in the last 7 weeks. We're in kind of advanced due diligence with another 4 companies or so. But we really encourage companies to reach out. We are an entrepreneur-friendly fund, if I want to put it that way. Pretty unbureaucratic. A lot of the deal flow comes to us through the Dublin BIC ecosystem, through the Investor Ready programme. But 50% is just companies coming directly to us. They've heard about the fund, so just encourage companies to reach out, and we can meet with companies fairly quickly.
Fantastic. Coming back to you, Marco, if I could ask you then about the investment process. And so you've been raising as you go, but in as much detail as you're comfortable, talk about your investment process and your fundraising process thus far. And how did you come across Richard? And that was as part of a bigger 600K round you were raising.
Yeah, so that would been sort of scrolling back to sort of August, September 2019, when we really got serious about setting out to do, at the time, Series A, 2 million euros is what we kind of put as our goal, and started reaching out to the various different funding sources that we thought would be relevant, across Europe, locally as well. It's relatively easy to get those first contacts. We would have spoken maybe in total to 50 or 60 different organizations. Michael described it there, I think, a little bit like a sales process. It sort of is. It's somewhere between sales and dating. we met Richard maybe early on. I think it was probably sort of September, October 2019. And I think the thing I'm most grateful to Richard for is he was very quick in our first meeting to say, look, I like this. It's the sort of thing that fits with what we're doing, and I'd like to be involved. And he made a strong signal that we would be able to work together. Inevitably, I think in that kind of round that we were doing, you end up with having to have several companies involved, several investors, and having at least one person early on in the mix giving you that sort of strong signal is really, really helpful. Your worst outcome from those meetings is people telling you that's very interesting and they'll get back to you. It sort of leaves you nowhere. I think as it evolved, we were putting together a round, we were feeling pretty comfortable about what we were doing, and COVID came, which changed the landscape entirely. That was a terrifying time. If you think back to sort of this time last year, and nobody knew what was going on. Literally, construction was going to shut down. We had just, it was scary for everybody. And again, Richard was consistent there. He stayed with us. He said, look, obviously things are changing here, but we're still in the mix. And again, I'd be very grateful for that. Our other investor who came along was Elkstone, who was mentioned earlier as well. And likewise, they just stayed with us. And what we did is, between the three of us, we made a deal that gave Evercam what it needed. And actually, the detail of what we did is we raised 600,000, but with Elkstone and Richard DBIC, and that allowed us to then go to the Davy Fund, which is an EIIS fund, later in the year, where we raised 2.5 million. So the end result for me, by the end of 2020, looking back, is we had actually raised 3 million, having set out to raise 2. So a really good result, and had dealt with this turmoil of COVID in the middle. My statement there would be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just explain to me then, Marco. So you did the combination of that seed round and the Davy Fund, and presumably having the seed round under your belt gave enormous confidence then to the Davy Group.
We could not have done one without the other, for a variety of reasons, both technical and I think also what you're saying there, that it was a statement of confidence. It improved our balance sheet. Yeah. Richard, coming to you then, so Marco said at one of the first meetings you indicated, I like this. Why?
Yeah, I suppose, we do get a very good, initial impression of a company on a first meeting. Sometimes it takes several meetings to really get under the bonnet. I think what really struck us with Evercam was, Marco refers to Evercam as maybe the difficult second album. The great team first and foremost, and that was very apparent just from their track records. Previously founded jobs.ie. I think what really resonated with us was they really demonstrated resilience. We're not the first investor in Evercam. There were some privates that came in before us, but what we saw when we met the company was a product that was highly evolved, a very, very strong kind of high-performing team. Marco and Vinny, the co-founders, very complementary to one another. And we could see that they doing very, very well in the Irish market, and not only onboarding new customers, but continuing to grow sales with existing customers. So that ability to upsell, and the product with rich features being developed that can be added on as additional modules. So a very, very attractive business model. And they'd moved into the UK market about a year and a half before we first engaged, and we could see how well that was working. Mainly the route to market in the UK was through channel partners, the likes of CCTV installation companies. So just really the team first and foremost, of course, that's always the most important thing. But just the traction they were getting, the rate of growth, the real focus that they had, that they have, but that they demonstrated when we first met them. And then it is a very replicable business model in different geographies. So really demonstrated working very, very well in the Irish market, getting great traction in the UK, and really then the opportunity to go into other markets such as, other countries in Europe, now initial foothold in Australia and the US. And we could see also a company that could really lead in this specific space. Construction is a sector that really hasn't been heavily disrupted by software. We all know about the AutoCADs, Autodesk, and so forth. So a lot of advancements, of course, in all the drawing technologies. But when it comes to actually looking at what's going on a construction site and the application of high resolution video and data analytics, a lot of companies talk about AI, machine learning. It's kind of become a bit of a buzzword, but these guys are really doing great stuff with machine learning, really intelligent analytics, being able to identify what's going on construction sites, from the movement of vehicles and materials coming in and out to other things, and the roadmap that they have. So
from you, and then kind of thinking it's almost like that perfect storm. There was the combination of a great team. They'd scaled it. They'd built a product. They were in the right sector. You could see the potential for scale. This kind of just all came together for you, and obviously you made that. Not that it all came together, but very quickly you could say, actually, this is something that interests us.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it takes a couple of meetings to really get a feel for a company. As I said, you do get a good feel in a first meeting, but actually, this is one of the few companies we've met where on first meeting and really just looking under the bonnet, then after the meeting, we really like what we see here. So we were quick to move. And, we got to, I think, position relatively quickly. I mean, I must compliment the company having fantastic data room. Just financial metrics to die for as a SaaS company. I wish every SaaS company could do as they do. So, they really had their house in order. We were able to do the due diligence very quickly and come to an investment decision very, very soon. And as Marco said, the pandemic then came along. So there's just a little bit of tweaking and just, assessing the situation.
Very good. I'm going to go to an audience question here, and please do keep your questions coming in. We're happy to take them. And Deirdre Lyons, who Dee was with us on the Innovate programme, is kind of talking about the nuts and bolts of the deal, I guess. So Marco, to you, as you're getting into the conversation with the Richard and with Alan at Elkstone, are you negotiating hard on valuations and the term sheet, or are you taking what you're given?
I would say it didn't feel like a very contentious part of the negotiation at all, the valuation side. The way those things seem to go is there's an amount of money that the company is probably right for. You're going to have a sense of that yourself as the entrepreneur, like how much money could you handle? I knew we didn't want 5 million. 2 million was probably at the upper end of what was right for us when we started looking. And as much as anything, that value, that amount of money that you're raising is very directly connected to what your valuation is likely to be. It feels a little bit cart before the horse, but that would be my assessment of it. Is you probably the first question is what is the right amount of money for the company?
Yes,
as much as anything else, and that drives valuation.
And there was probably a question. I mean, you were lucky in dealing, Marco, with both Richard and Alan, who are professional investors who understand the world. So there was probably more of a collegiate discussion around what's right for the investor and what's right for you, the business, as opposed to an arm wrestle back and forward over minor points. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah. I mean, it was my first time raising professional money. But like I say, that wasn't a stumbling block for us. I think my focus is to create a long-term successful company, and that's one reason why one doesn't want to over dilute early on. But it's really my main reason, and in that, you're very aligned with your investors. Something that I think maybe people like Richard and Alan were more aware of than I was is that the deal I'm trying to make with them directly leads you on to the next deal or not. So they need as well that kind of a cap table structure that looks sensible and looks like there's the right trajectory when you're starting again in 2 years to go looking for your next investor, or 1 year in some cases.
So I think one is your chances are you're going to be fairly aligned there with your investor, or certainly for us, that wasn't a major point of contention. I think it's something that probably gets more airtime than it necessary.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Richard. And so a question came in there from the audience about, how do I find Richard and what does the process look like of approaching Richard? Talk to me in general then for the founders who are on the call with us. How do they approach somebody like you? What do they need to do before they come to you? And how are you going to handle that as an inquiry?
I mean, as I said at the start, we are entrepreneur friendly. You do hear some funds saying, they really prefer introductions, for companies to come in through a kind of a common party. Half our deal flow would probably come in through the Dublin BIC ecosystem. So in terms of getting in touch, either introduction through Dublin BIC if you're on the Investor Ready programme, through the likes of Conor or one of the colleagues, or direct to us. We have a website, you can email us directly. We also have an inquiries sheet that you can fill in and send in your pitch deck. So really, it's direct or through somebody in the network that knows us. It doesn't really matter. We just want to meet companies that are, at the stage, C to Series A and in the sectors that we like. And in terms of the sort of the process, it's really sending in a pitch deck, and then we set up a meeting. We try to meet companies within a week or two, depending on workload of them coming in.
Okay, so it's straightforward enough. Go on the website, look for you, send you in a note, send you the pitch deck, and then within a kind of week to 10 days, you'll set up the call and you'll do the evaluation. And at that, you're going to be guiding, look, maybe like Marco, it's of interest to us, or you know what, this isn't for us.
Correct. I mean, I suppose like generally, our first, depending on what's going on, our first calls would be sort of 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And, we give the company a very good steer after the call. If the company's too early, a lot of companies that came to us over the last year were too early. We like to meet companies. If you're on the early side, it's okay to approach us. And, it often happens that you come to us and we say, look, we'd like to see you doing X, Y, and Z, perhaps in terms of traction, and then come back to us, when you've done that.
Okay.
But, in terms of the process, really, if we like a company, it'll be a series of meetings thereafter to get under the bonnet of the company, to get to know the team better. And then the kind of the key milestone then, if it's going to proceed, is a term sheet. Okay. And then further DD. But we try to streamline the process as
very good. I'm running out of time. Marco, I'm going to come to you for the last word, if I may, and then I'll pick up a question or two if any have come in. The question is, I suppose, having gone through the process of both the private funding and the Davy Fund, what's your advice to the founders, the entrepreneurs who are on this call around the fundraising process? If you could give them in about 30 seconds some guidance that would be of use based on what you've done, what might that be?
You have to set aside the necessary time. Do everything you can to make each interaction with an investor somehow meaningful for you. That you must really try and get information back from them, get feedback from them, and then filter. Like a lot of it's just going to be irrelevant to you, but do try and get that feedback. I discovered late in the process that there was a heap of American and European specialist investors in the construction sector. And I felt very stupid that I didn't know that up front. I learned that too late. But also the American and the European ones are delighted to look at something that is specific to their sector anywhere. And then keep the faith. The last couple of interviews all mentioned the word resilience. It's tough. You keep going. Try and keep it the pace as well. You've got to move fast.
Fantastic. Keep the faith. Lessons for all of us in that, I think, and that tenacity and perseverance. Can I say a big thank you, Marco, for giving up your time and coming and joining us this morning? We really appreciate it, and continued success to you and the team at Evercam, and to Richard, continued success to you with the fund. And I hope a lot of the people that we have on the call with us will come and find us. Do come and find Richard. He's open for business and he would love to chat with you. So Marco, Richard, thank you so much, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you. See you.
So moving on then to our final segment, which is, the later stage founder. And we're delighted to have joining us this morning is Will Parker from Safefood 360. And Will is in conversation with Martin Murray, one of my colleagues at Dublin BIC. And really, I think what we're going to explore in this segment is that journey from the very early stage. And I think Safefood 360, Will, I think set it up 2011. And we're now at 2021 and they've just announced an acquisition to a US firm. And really what I think I'm interested in, and hopefully what you're interested in hearing on the call, is that journey from the very early stage right up until the exit, and what did that look like? To welcome my colleague Martin Murray, who's here with us this morning. Martin, thank you for coming in. I'll hand you over to Martin and we'll bring in Will Parker from Safefood 360 to kick off the conversation.
Good morning, everyone, and we're moving into the final quarter of funding and scaling. Will Parker, Chief Commercial Officer with Safefood 360, you're extraordinarily welcome to funding and scaling.
Good morning, Martin. Thank you very much for having me. I hope you can hear me all right.
We can hear you very well. Thank you very much. So, Will, we're going to be talking today about scaling a business to the size that Safefood 360 is, and doing all the things that you're doing with many, many customers around the world. We're also going to be talking about the investment journey from startup right through to trade sale acquisition that Safefood 360 has experienced. And I'm really looking forward to discussing that with you. But to begin, could you introduce us, please, to Safefood 360?
Sure. Okay. So we were set up in 2010. I think I should put my hand up at this stage. I was not the founder. The two founders were George Howlett and Philip Gillen. I knew them before the company was actually, or before our solution had gone live. And I was chairman of the company all the way through its journey. So I was involved from the early days, but I can't claim the credit for being the founder. So we set up, we incorporated 2010. Our product went live summer 2011. We announced it at a big food trade show in the US that summer. And we partnered with DBIC in 2012 for a fundraise, which was very important to establishing our trajectory. And we finally exited to a London-based life sciences company called LGC in December last year, so just over 2 months ago. And now we've all been subsumed into their operation, which is a great opportunity for a company like ours to scale on an instant.
Please go ahead, Will.
So as I said, now we're here. We were 2 months into our integration with LGC. It's going well so far, and this is giving us the opportunity to expand in different parts of the world at a scale that was really very difficult for a company in the sort of safe food sort of range, revenue-wise, of around 3.5-4 million euro, which is where we were before. So to be under the umbrella of a 700 million euro business is a lot more comfortable in terms of being able to expand your operation without having to worry about whether or not you can afford it out of your own revenues, and would need to take on more capital to do that.
And can you just remind us, Will, what is the business of Safefood 360?
Sure. So it's a bit of regulatory and compliance software. There's a clue in the name. We really focus on food companies, so food manufacturers, retailers, and distributors, more than food service companies. And what we basically do is take all of the manual processes that food companies have to do to produce safe food, and we put them up in the cloud, meaning that everybody in those operations has access to their data immediately, rather than, as would have been the case in the old days, I was the food safety manager in a company, I'd turn around from my desk and the whole of the back wall there would be covered with A4 lever arch files filled with documentation, production checks, packaging checks, temperature readings, all sorts of things like that, which are now automated and online in Safefood.
Very good. Can you give us an idea of the scale of the business, number of customers, kind of revenues, number of people in Safefood 360 now?
Sure. So in terms of our company, we are about 30 odd people. We're primarily based, our headquarters in Blanchardstown in Dublin. We have a small operation in the US, and we also do some of our software development out of Pune in India. So in terms of customers, we probably have around about 150 customers, several thousand users worldwide. We operate in all continents apart from Antarctica. Our customer base starts at about 10 million euros revenue. So below that, it's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And our biggest customers are in the sort of 30 billion US dollars and above range.
So Antarctica is still waiting for you to break into it.
Still waiting, yeah.
Okay. So you're a 30-person company and you're selling into businesses including $30 billion publicly quoted companies. Can you let's talk about how a 30-person company achieves that, or starting from much smaller than that, how you achieve that. How does Safefood 360 do lead generation, lead qualification, and actually closing the business with customers?
That's a good question. And I mean, it's certainly interesting. We sold in 2016 to a $30 billion revenue organization. And they talk in sort of warfare about asymmetrical warfare, where you no longer have armies of equal size fighting. You have one very small organization, one very large one. And that kind of was something that sprung to mind with us back in those days. How could we, with revenues of say 1.5 to 2 million euro, be selling to an organization of that size, which was several thousand times bigger than us? And the answer is, what you have to do is really demonstrate credibility in your sector. Now, we're fortunate that we're selling a set of regulatory and compliance tools. In other words, we didn't have to make them up. It wasn't our own interpretation of food safety. Legislation around the world sets what those standards are. So it's not that difficult to comply with them, provided you understand the legislation. You can build it into your solution. So when these companies were looking at what was available on the market, the size of the vendor is not as important as, are they talking sense? Does their solution deliver what the legislation in the various territories that we work in require? So how we generate leads is very simple. It's simply content-based marketing. So we don't have any sort of slick sales messages of any particular sort. If you are a technical manager, a quality manager in a big food business operator, well, even quite a small food business operator, you will search on the web for tools to help you do your job. And those tools are science-based technical tools. They're not flashy, gimmicky type solutions. They're precise, specific, with measurable outcomes. And our website is very science-based. There's lots of technical content, lots of white papers, and that establishes our credentials. So people that are looking for this kind of software know that we're a serious company. We're not doing anything other than reflecting the legislation and demonstrating that we have a solution that can give them what they're looking for in a far more efficient way than doing it on paper, in Word, Excel, SharePoint, all the sort of semi-automated methodologies that they're using up to now. So having got those leads...
Well, if I could just come in there for a second, because you make a point there that's extremely relevant to many of our clients in Dublin BIC, and that is that small, fairly early stage, but very innovative companies can sell very effectively to the billion-dollar corporations. those billion-dollar corporations will be very, very happy to work with you as an early-stage startup if you know what you're doing and you're delivering a solution for them.
I think that's correct. As you can see by my lack of hair, I'm an elderly salesman, and I've been selling since well into the previous century. And in those days, large companies would not, generally speaking, buy from small businesses because they saw it as a risk. Fortunately, that world has changed probably significantly or so in the last 10 years. So I quite agree, Martin. Small companies can sell perfectly legitimately to big companies, provided they've established their credentials properly. And this is one area where SaaS helps, because if you're only tied up for someone for a year or so, contractually speaking, the large company feels that their risk is somewhat mitigated. It's not going to be a decision which they will have to live with for many, many years, as it might have been in the old days with a client-server type deployment or a mainframe type deployment. So it is easier now than it was in those days.
Safefood 360 doesn't do any cold calling. It puts the content out there, generates lots of leads coming in as a result of that. How do you qualify those leads? And with the ones that you really work on, what sort of resources do you deploy in order to close the sale?
Well, you're quite right. In sort of 5 or 6 years selling at Safefood, I've never had to make a cold call, which is a relief that anyone who has to sell will share with me, no doubt. And that's good, because it's a little bit like, say, accounting software. Food safety is not optional. As a food business operator, you can't say, well, there's a recession on this year or there's COVID, we're not going to do food safety. If you want to produce food, you have to comply. So it's a lot easier for us. A bit like accounting software, you can't say, I'm not going to do that. You have to if you want to operate. So we have an inquiry. Our qualification process is very straightforward. It's simply establishing if the person inquiring is actually interested in an implementation project or merely educating themselves, which they're perfectly entitled to do. They can see that our website is technical, but we're not really in the business of educating people more than is necessary, and more than is necessary to try and get them to make a purchasing decision. So we qualify them. We're not ashamed of the pricing. So Safefood is priced on a per site basis. The opening price is $15,000 per year. So we get that out on the table reasonably quickly, simply because there's no point in going through a sales cycle and demonstrating the software, which is something which takes at least an hour, and then find that someone has a budget of €500. So we're quick to get that out on the table. If that isn't a significant objection, we will very easily be able to demonstrate that the value that someone can get from implementing a system like this rapidly exceeds the cost of it in terms of accuracy, in terms of immediacy of data, and also, if you like, on the insurance side, the reduction in risk of a recall, which is the nightmare situation for any food manufacturer or distributor, that they have to recall products that they have produced or sent out. Both in terms of the absolute cost of that, but also the brand damage. So the complexity of the sale isn't that great, on the basis that the disadvantages of not doing it are very high.
Very good. I'd like to move to our next topic, which is about that investment journey. I know the early stage investment with Safefood 360 included investment from Dublin BIC's AIB Seed Capital Fund, but I'd like to move closer to the end of the journey. In Dublin BIC, we talk quite a lot about getting investor ready. I'd like to talk to you about what makes a business acquisition ready. What were the characteristics that made Safefood 360 ready to be acquired last December by a much larger company?
Okay, I think it would probably be wrong to say that this time last year we said to ourselves at our board level, okay, we want to sell the business. So Now, some people do find themselves in that position and say they want to do that. What we wanted to do was to scale. And there are two ways of scaling. You can scale in a sort of arithmetic way, by which I mean you use your revenues that you're generating and funnel some of those into expanding your business. Or there's an exponential level of growth, which you can do in one of two ways. You can take on more investment. You can borrow money at scale, or you can potentially sell the business. So we felt that we had several years of arithmetic growth under our belt. So we knew what that was all about. And we could see that we would be very elderly indeed by the time we had scaled the business, even with positive growth to the size that we wanted. So this led us to a discussion. Well, let's look and see what we've got out in the market. What we had under our belts at that stage was several years of continuous growth. We had a large and diverse customer base, as I described, on all continents and in all sizes of companies, from $10 to $30 billion. Largely, we're based in the US, so we had 70% of our customers over there, but a big footprint in Western Europe as well, also quite a bit down in Australia and New Zealand. So largely English-speaking companies, though our application runs in many different languages. So that gave us a firm starting point for the journey of, do we want to raise some money or will we actually end up selling the business? And as part of that lengthy exercise, which took us probably 6 months last year, from about May through to the end of November, we explored various options. So raising some more money, changing our capital structure within the company, and finally a complete sale, which is actually what we ended up doing.
Okay, so it was very proactive on your part. My last question to you, Will, can you give us an idea of the kind of metrics associated with the valuation of the business or a business such as Safefood 360 in that acquisition scenario?
Certainly. I mean, as I'm sure your audience knows in great detail, the key metrics for a SaaS-based business is your recurring revenue. That's really where that drives the valuation. And then you have a mix between professional services, in some cases, such as Safefood, or just pure software. So in our case, like a lot of enterprise level software, you had a roughly 1-to-1 ratio in the first year between the software costs and the necessary services to implement the solution. So obviously, as time goes on, your revenues become more skewed towards the software because you get a greater percentage of recurring revenue as your total revenue. But we're still selling a fair amount of services. So we would have looked to get something in the sort of 4 to 8 range of recurring revenue. That's the kind of multiple that is reasonable for a company that's growing, a company that has a software-focused blend to its mixture of revenues, as we did. And you go to the market with your corporate finance advisors and position the company in your IM operating in those reigns. Now, it depends who the buyer is to some extent, whether it's private equity or a trade buyer, the sort of multiples that they'll be interested in, that they can drive value from in their business. And there's not much you can do about that as a company looking to either raise money or sell. You have to just position your company as best you can. And it's really their own internal corporate finance teams that will be able to work out the metrics they can leverage internally. And that's the value that they're prepared to pay.
Okay, so be aware of who the buyer is and what they can pay. Very good. I've been rejoined by Conor Carmody. Conor, do we have a time for a question for Will?
We do, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Will, I have a question coming in here from the audience. How does Will retain ownership of his product, which is created by government regulators? Is anything patented?
That's a good question. Well, Safefood doesn't really do anything. Not to sort of shoot ourselves in the foot, but it doesn't really do anything other than reflect the legislation that exists out there. So, for example, food safety regulations around the world are governed by something called GFSI, set up sort of 20 odd years ago, Global Food Safety Initiative. And this organization sets up a number of different standards. You might have heard of things like BRCGS or SQF or FSSC 22000. Those organizations own the food safety standards, not Safefood at all. All we do is take those standards and allow people, or rather our customers can take their, let's say, paper-based copy of BRCGS and load it up into Safefood. So they're using our platform as a way of complying with those third-party standards. There's no question of Safefood owning the standards or saying that if you put the standards in Safefood, you're necessarily compliant with them. It's simply like, it's the same perhaps as putting a form that you have on paper in Excel. That doesn't really change the nature of the form. It's just the way that it's delivered. So what we own are the workflows that you have within Safefood. So in other words, how do you go from one step to the next in complying with these standards? The standards are a completely separate thing from us, and we have no ownership of them. It's just the way that people complete them, and that's really what our IP is.
That's very clear, Will. Thank you for that. Will Parker, Chief Commercial Officer with Safefood 360, thank you very much for joining us here on Funding and Scaling. Really appreciate your insights. Congratulations on everything that Safefood 360 has achieved, and good luck with the journey going forward with your new, larger organisation.
Many thanks for having me, and thanks also for DBIC for coming on this journey with us.
And before I let you go, Will, Conor here, thanks for your time this morning. I really enjoyed it. And thanks, Martin. One quick question that just before I let you go, about a minute, Will, talk to me about the importance of the team and building the team. So we had a question from the audience there around how hard it is to build up a team, particularly in the early stage when you're cash strapped and you're trying to build that team out. Give us some insights on that before I let you go, please.
Sure. Well, I mean, a guy like me, i.e. the salesperson, is probably not the first person that you need. So you need to have an idea. If I look at Safefood, we had two founders. We had the person who had the idea, which was our CEO and founder, George Howlett, who was a food safety specialist. But then we needed a technical person, which was Philip Gillen. And Philip basically took George's ideas and encapsulated them, delivered them in a software solution. So those two created the core of the business. Then they needed to get it to market. And that's really where, obviously, they made the initial sales to prove and validate the concept. But after that, you need to scale it. And that's really when you start to need a professional services team, in our case, to implement the solution, a sales team to actually get it to market in the first place, and then a tech services team to provide technical support and customer services. So timing is important. And I think one thing that I wouldn't advise is building out a massive team to start off with when you don't have any revenues. It's much better to prove your concept first and then sort of scale arithmetically, as we were talking about earlier, as your revenues allow it, and then choose the right time, as we did with DBIC, to say, well, we're going to take some money on now. We've proved the concept. We know we can sell it. We just need to do it faster and at a greater scale. And that's really when the team becomes paramount and essential to the future trajectory of the company.
Fantastic. Will, continued success, and many thanks for joining us and giving us your time this morning. Martin,
that's a pleasure. Many thanks.
Thank you. Martin, I'll ask you just to stay there while we finish off. We do have time for one more question if someone has a burning question that they'd like to give us while we have Martin here and before I let you go. But if not, I'll move to summarise. You can put one in if you still have time for it. So listen, thanks to our audience for joining us this morning, and we hope that you found this kind of particular event informative. You heard from the kind of the early stage people around kind of accessing funding, and the European funding certainly is something that should be looked into. We heard from that kind of seed round and building the seed round, and I think the advice from Richard was contact us. So if you're going on that journey of seed round, you've got to start early on building a sales pipeline, and you've got to start, kind of talking to people, pitching it, getting it ready. And then a fantastic journey from Will over that last 10 years to build, to scale, and to exit. And I thought some lovely comments then to close us off around the team and building the team. So there's some of our key messages. A reminder that our consultants are available in our kind of interactive zone. So, if you have questions, if we didn't answer it, please do jump on into the interactive zone. The guys are there, we're waiting, we'll take your questions, we'll remain behind and happy to share those questions. If you are starting and scaling a business, please do come and talk to us at Dublin BIC. As I said at the outset, this is what we do. We help entrepreneurs start and scale businesses. We work with founders to kind of develop the investor ready plan, get that ready, and then get you in front of our funders, get you talking to people and moving it. So do reach out to us, startup@dublinbic.ie, and we'd be happy to help. And you've seen some of the kind of case studies that we've presented to you this morning. We're fairly well connected in this area. We've a really good team behind us with great expertise in delivering on this. Can I say thanks to the team at Dublin BIC for putting this event together this morning? Can I say thanks to the team at StreamTech for the production? And can I say thanks to the team at Space for hosting us here? And as Michael mentioned, we will be coming back to normality. We have our building here at Space. We have our new GEC under construction. We can't wait to show you that, and maybe we'll have a future event from there. So on that, I'll leave you with that. Come on, share some questions with us in the interactive zone, and we look forward to keeping in touch and hearing from you again. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for coming in.